Perfect. Thanks, Becca. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really appreciative of, Becca and Seth and Katie joining us and sort of co-authoring this webinar together. So my name is Laura Ludwig. I'm the section chair of the Southwest section of the PA chapter of the American Planning Association, which is always a mouthful to say. But I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce our three speakers today. We do have the CM number. I believe you'll get it at the end, but the credits for today were approved. So just FYI, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're excited. I think this will be a really great presentation. And then we tried to leave plenty of time at the end for some really valuable just sort of discussion, question, answers, dialogue amongst everyone that's participating. So as I said, I'm Laura Ludwig. In addition to being the Southwest chair, which is a volunteer role, my full-time gig is with HRG. I'm the group manager of planning and design there and a senior community planner. I work on lots of different projects from comprehensive plans to downtown studies to ordinances and all of that. So today we have three speakers with us. I'll introduce Katie first. So Katie is the Brownfields redevelopment specialist for the Northern West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center. In this role, she serves as the project lead, providing technical assistance on industrial legacy sites throughout the state, assisting communities with proposals and site development support to establish sustainable economic development initiatives for West Virginia. And before joining MBAC, Katie worked as a city and county planner since 2006. So she does have a planning background. And also she received her AICP certification in 2019. Seth is the Community Development Associate for the Brownfields Assistance Center. Seth was born and raised in the heart of West Virginia's southern coalfields and has a passion for community-based change and the promotion of economic and environmental sustainability in Appalachia. Seth received his undergraduate degrees at Concord University with majors in history and political science and a minor in international studies. He is also a recent graduate of West Virginia University with a master's of public administration. And lastly, Becca Phillips is the Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Brownfields Assistance Center and the West Virginia Water Research Institute. Becca supports all outreach activities, including organizing conferences and events, coordinating webinars, and managing websites and social media. Becca earned her degrees from Utah State University, specifically a bachelor's degree in marketing and master's degree in instructional leadership with an emphasis in student affairs. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll turn it over to, I think, Katie, right? Or back to Becca. I'm not sure. Katie. Okay, great.
Thanks, Becca and Kate. Now I'm introducing myself again, Laura. As she said, my name is Katie. I'm here at WVU. We are the technical assistance to Brownfield provider. And so you may be wondering why we here at WVU are speaking to you in Pennsylvania. Well, we are the technical assistance to Brownfield provider for EPA Region 3, and that is the Mid-Atlantic region, which includes Pennsylvania. I think I speak for my team when I say that we've had a good time working with Laura to prepare today's webinar. So we hope you find it helpful. I hope that you all feel comfortable enough to ask questions. If you think of them during the presentation, Becca will be monitoring the chat. So please don't hesitate to reach out. If we don't know the answer, if it's one that's a deep dive, that's okay. Ask that too. We'll follow up, and we can always get an answer or put you in touch with someone who may be able to do so. And so we do many things here as the TAB provider, providing folks with technical assistance and resources. And one of the resources includes webinars like today's about brownfield education. We can do those in the way of webinars or in person. So again, that's what brings us here today. So we're just going to set the basis here with what is a brownfield. Well, we of course use the EPA definition, and it states that it is a real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. We like to have a little fun here and let you know that, if you're not familiar with brownfields, you do come across them on a regular basis. An example includes, in this shot, an old prison site, could be an old school also, where you may find asbestos and lead-based paint. Here, the second shot is a scene from Walking Dead. If any of you are familiar with where this scene was shot, but in this situation, it's a former industrial or warehouse site, so you could find any number of contaminants on that site. Our boss, Carrie, really likes this photo from the cartoon Up, so you have an old house, which again, may have asbestos and lead-based paint. And then certainly bringing in another cartoon with the Simpsons, and that is really what you think of when you envision a brownfield site. The contamination, smokestacks, some tanks around, lots of oozing going on. So in your everyday travels, you may come across a site and you'll start to go, that could be a brownfield site. So we want to think about, why are brownfields problematic? Well, some of the reasons include, the health hazards that they may currently be posing, that maybe they posed in the past, some safety liabilities. They're eyesores, economic ripple effect when you don't have a business that is operating anymore, and that the impact that has on the surrounding community and the people in the region, that again just creates an effect from the closure of a business and now a vacant building or sites. Increased crime, you can see that in relation to, again, a site that is no longer contributing to the community. The environmental degradation, again, with the contamination and hazards that may be there on the site, and then certainly a decrease in the property values. So you look at this and you think about, why are they problematic? And sometimes it's easier to look at that and it's hard to look past that, but we want to help you recognize what are the benefits to addressing your brownfield site. So you kind of want to think about that last slide and look at all the great opportunities that you have with addressing them, from assessing them and cleaning them up and ultimately redeveloping them. So when we touched on liabilities before, you can turn those health and safety liabilities into assets for the community. You can then ultimately increase property values, create new and local jobs. Again, if you had a closure of a plant or facility, that can cripple, the local economy, and this gives you the opportunity to try to bring some life back to the workforce there. Eliminate that eyesore. Again, you can fix it up. Maybe it involves the demolition of a building, or maybe you can actually have the opportunity to fix up the building, and we'll have some photo examples of how that's been done later. Of course, this is one of my favorites with my planner brain here, but supporting sustainable land use by preserving green space and preventing sprawl. It's a great opportunity to be able to take something that is no longer contributing to the community, and that means physically and economically, and just be able to bring that back to life rather than having to go take on greenfield redevelopment. It allows you the opportunity to enhance your economic and tax-based development. I know sometimes as a planner, a lot of these benefits, and then you also have to bring your planning commission and your city council and county commission on board with that. And sometimes that's the angle you may need to highlight, is, again, hey, let's take these sites, and if we work with them a little bit, again, this can help generate some tax base that we've been missing for some time. And also just increase your economic vitality with the environmental benefits, because ultimately, who doesn't want to eliminate any health hazards and ultimately see that improved, so that it can, again, contribute to the economic health of the community. We also, Seth and I were talking about, want to be able to highlight the unexpected benefits that you may not think about with brownfield redevelopment. So we just touched on some of those that seem a little more obvious. Um, and I think I included this link at the very end of this presentation, but the EPA talks about environmental and economic benefits. And so again, when you think about brownfields, they're likely located at a central location. So it's already kind of central to the community, not always, but a lot of times. And then you already have existing connections to infrastructure. Some of that infrastructure may be aging and it may not be up to the capacity that you need, but it already gives you a good foundation and a good start. So that is another plus in the category for a brownfield over greenfield development. The redevelopment reduces the expansion of impervious surface. And certainly the impact that has is hopefully that can, if you focus on that and improving any flooding or runoff issues that are already happening, if they are at that site, you can improve that with the redevelopment. And then ultimately that is more climate friendly. So it can help reduce the risk of flash flooding from urban sprawl. I was just driving here in Morgantown the other day and we had just a typical rain, and I thought, oh gosh, I wonder what we could do to address this along the street here. But you know, it's always a good opportunity when you can open up that site for redevelopment, and then you can explore some better options that are available. And so also the EPA site talks about when you look at taking advantage of EPA funding and technical assistance, things that the EPA is really focusing on right now is how to mitigate climate impact. When you pursue some assistance, again, with the EPA and through brownfields, you have that opportunity to, again, work to mitigate this. And also, they now are giving you some opportunities and resources to support communities that are dealing with environmental justice concerns. So those are some things that you just may not have been aware of. And again, it's becoming more of a focus for the EPA, and we'd be happy to help you learn more about that. How can brownfields be redeveloped? Well, these are all sites that we have dealt with here in our capacity in our center. Could be an academic building. The site in the top left here is in West Virginia, and it is a local university, what they call the academic building, but in behind there, this actually created a campus, and so there's a financial center in behind there. So this was a good catalyst for this site, and a beautiful building. You can see it's adjacent to the railroad track. And again, this was part of a larger plan that they're still working on there. But you can see I love this photo because it kind of looks like a rendering, but it's actually just a great shot on a pretty day in this town. But again, that was the end product here on a brownfield site. Here in York, Pennsylvania, there's a ballpark. I was just there a few weeks ago. This is also showing a downtown commercial center here in West Virginia. And then also, not to highlight West Virginia too much, but we're really proud of this library. It was once a landfill. So you can take that landfill and turn it into something great for the community. So now that we've talked about, or I've talked about brownfields, I want to be able to start to make that connection better between brownfields and planning, because this is what gets me excited. And I say it all the time. And I love that I'm talking to folks who are also practicing planners, and you can appreciate my nerdy excitement here. So the intersection of brownfields and planning comes with brownfields at the center. So if you have the opportunity in your community and it's time to revisit that comprehensive plan, think about bringing those brownfields in, right? So you can talk about how you can incorporate those, and that helps you address them, because also, again, that's going to touch on economic redevelopment to bring that into your community. Brownfields may be downtown. If you have a downtown redevelopment plan, again, you have the opportunity to connect that. A strategic plan for the community, parks and rec plan, because there are certainly so many opportunities to turn a brownfield into a park or a recreational site. And then a transportation plan, because certainly a railroad track or a train depot could be a brownfield site, and you can just make that connection from there. There's so many great ways that, again, you can think about that connection, and it just kind of creates a domino effect. But as planners, you can put your put your hat on and think about the bigger picture and think about how you can start to connect all these. And at the very end of the presentation, we're going to talk about, just briefly, letting you know, or reminding you how important the story is of Brownfields. So when you start to pursue some funding or assistance, you need to be able to tell the story about the Brownfields in your community. And so these will come back into play later on when we discuss that. If you start to want to pursue funding or technical assistance from the EPA, there are some planning activities that they list as eligible activities. And so that is a link when you get this presentation at the bottom of the screen. The link will be you'll be able to click on it when Becca provides you with this presentation. But some of the great things you can do with, for example, an EPA assessment grant is you can do climate smart brownfields planning. That is new. I'm honestly still trying to learn about that one myself. But that's a great tool to be able to focus on site reuse assessment, community health assessment. So when your local hospital or your county health department needs to prepare those plans, those are things that you can help and tie in how that impacts the community with the work that they are already required to do. Resource roadmaps to help you start to identify where could funding sources come in when you look at these redevelopment projects, a revitalization plan, and then some other things include an evaluation of market viability. So if you're trying to figure out what may actually be successful, these are some tools that you can go after. Now, if you do apply for an EPA Brownfield assessment grant, as long as 40% of the grant is actual assessment work, so that's phase 1 and phase 2 assessments, then you can also be able to do the planning activities, some of those which are listed there. So you've heard about some of the things you can do, and now we want to talk about how you can access these planning activities. So funding and assistance that is available includes first EPA Brownfield grants. You've probably heard of these, multi-purpose grant. The EPA calls them MARC grants. So that's why if you're looking at how it's spelled out there, it's multi-purpose assessment, revolving loan fund, and cleanup grant. So the multi-purpose is actually an assessment grant and a cleanup grant, and you join both tasks at once. That is a pretty big grant. It probably wouldn't be an ideal grant to start with if you haven't applied for an EPA Brownfield grant before, because it's a lot to undertake. An assessment grant is certainly very competitive, but it may be a better one to start with if you believe you have the capacity. But again, multi-purpose, you can assess multiple sites, and you can also clean up a site under the banner of that grant, should that be awarded. An assessment grant allows you to assess, again, phase 1, phase 2 assessments. You can do lead-based paint and asbestos evaluations and assessments under that. And then also, again, those topics that we just discussed previously, the planning topics, you can also do with an assessment grant. Revolving loan fund, that is also a bit of a challenge because you have to have strong capacity in place to be able to do that, but there's so much good that you can do for the community. And if you are the entity that would take that on and be able to help communities with some smaller loans, cleanup is what it says. After you've gone through the assessment for a site or 2 sites, you have a sense and you know what are the contaminants on the site, what is the extent of it, and you've got an idea of how much cost it will be to actually clean up the site. You can pursue that and actually clean that up with EPA funding. And job training grants, an entity can work with the EPA to receive some funding. So it's an application that happens at a different time from the MARC grant applications. I think it may actually be getting ready to take off again, I think. I can get back to you on that, but that allows an entity to be able to train some groups to be able to go through and help with some of the cleanup and mitigation efforts that are going, not to be the environmental consultants, but to actually do some of the physical work. So those are good opportunities as well. So those are the grants. And now we look at the EPA technical assistance. not to be confused with we are your TAB provider, and TBA is the targeted brownfields assessment, but that is assistance available from the EPA. And then also there is technical assistance, and that's broken down into two categories, which is regionally directed and land revitalization. So what is TBA, you ask? It can allow for the assistance of efforts under the Brownfield program to help clean up and redevelop brownfield sites. It's available, much like the grants, to help states, tribes, and municipalities. And so you're actually working with the consultant through the EPA. So a nice thing about that is you don't have to be the one to administer a grant from the beginning. You're working with the EPA, and they are actually that contact person with the consultant. So it's a good opportunity if you don't have a lot of capacity. So it's a great one for that. If you either don't have capacity and you want to be able to get exposure to the EPA and some of these great benefits, or maybe you only have one site identified, that would be a good opportunity as well, because again, it's less of a headache, but it's a great opportunity, and you have facilitation happening all the time with your EPA project officer. So it's a great opportunity for both of you to learn more about one another, your EPA representatives, and they can learn more about you. It's a great opportunity. You can do phase 1 and phase 2 assessments, and then they can help prepare you for some cleanup options. And generally, the services range from $50,000 to $100,000. So again, it's not a grant, but it is services that you would be receiving. And I should also say the application is on a rolling basis. So it's not a hard deadline that you have with the grants. And when it comes to some technical assistance for planning and reuse, it allows you to help communities identify practical, safe site reuse options and approaches that support your local goals through access to site planning, design, and finance experts. So this is, again, some technical assistance. It is a little bit different, but it's, again, helping you gear up to do some of the planning work to help you understand what could actually happen on the site. And so if there are barriers in place that your community hasn't been able to overcome, hopefully going this route with some of the assistance can be beneficial to you. So there are actually specific contact folks with the EPA for Region 3 that can help you with this. If you'd like us to help you get in touch with these folks, we would be happy to do so. I promise they're great to work with. And so when you think about which option is best for you, I touched on this a little bit. With an EPA Brownfield grant, it's a hard deadline. So that just happened on November the 13th of this, last month. And so it opened up the end of September. And so it's nationally competitive, and you've got that window of time. And so again, it's hard and fast deadline. Also, the applicant is responsible for overseeing the grant. And then assessment grants are usually for multiple sites. I know we actually had, before we became the TAB provider, we received an assessment grant. And so you're constantly trying to evaluate which sites do you want to take on, and trying to see where the level of need is. But again, you're the responsible person for that. When it comes to the technical assistance, again, it's on a rolling basis for the application, which is certainly, that's a good thing. It's a much smaller application. It's not nearly as overwhelming. It's a regional focus, so you're not competing against everyone nationally. And again, it's facilitated by the EPA. So it's a good way to get some exposure to the EPA Brownfield world if you haven't had that opportunity yet. And generally, it's targeted at one site or maybe some contiguous sites where you can start to look at that area. When it comes to the brownfield redevelopment process, it's not black and white. It's not a one size fits all. How you handle it in your community may be different than how your neighbor can handle it. But we like to say that site identification is how it all starts. Now, how did that site come to your attention? That could be a different story, but you identify the sites. and then you determine the site assessment that needs to happen. So phase one is desk research. You're looking into that. Your environmental consultant is looking into the history of the site to determine if there may be contaminants and if there's a need to go forward and do a phase two assessment, which would actually mean some soil samples. If you need to do cleanup, then certainly that would happen. And then you can get into your site planning and reuse so that you know what you're working toward. Project financing and then redevelopment. And again, this is, we're not saying that this is the hard and fast flow of it, but this is generally an idea of what you can expect here. Sometimes, again, it happens in different intervals. So again, if you're looking to redevelop, if you're looking to revise your comprehensive plan, or you may be looking at your downtown revitalization plan, you may have already started to think about the site planning and reuse, and then you kind of wouldn't, then you may start to look at the site identification. So that's okay. All right, when it comes to where to start, I am going to hand this over to Seth.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Sorry for interrupting. We had a little miscommunication on where we were picking up and where we were leaving off, but thank you, Katie. Reintroduce myself. I'm Seth Cardwell. I'm the Community Development Associate on the Brownfields team here. I've been here for about 5 months now. I just crossed the 5-month mark, and I am kind of focused on how we get community engagement and community development and kind of find that niche with policy analysis and policy praxis. We're still working on building what my role really looks like, and so I've been more involved with TAB here recently. So the biggest question that we all have with brownfield redevelopment is really, where do you start? In addition to identifying the site, you want to ensure that the community is engaged from the get-go. You want to prepare a brownfield inventory, which we'll touch on later, a little bit later, because that's something that our office can help with. We have an inventory support program. You want to ensure that the community is engaged in every step of the way. And I think as this is kind of geared toward planners, you guys will kind of appreciate that process. You want to make sure you create a community vision for the property or the area that you are targeting for redevelopment. And you want to identify the property area and assets and needs. As far as site details go for assessments and cleanups, once you get the process going and you've identified your site, you want to make sure that you must have permission to access the property. We always say here that we do not condone trespassing, so we do not want you to go on the property unless you have ownership or permission from the owner to access the site. And moving forward, you want to determine if and how to acquire that property if it's necessary. And this is more on inventory. So the number one thing that you need to do is take inventory of your sites. That's going to be your first step. So when you're kind of looking at your community and you take a step back and you say, what do we need to do here? What can we do here to redevelop it, or look at these kind of comprehensive plans moving forward? Think about how you can incorporate brownfield sites in order to ensure redevelopment in those areas. They're everywhere. The area that I come from in Southern West Virginia is absolutely riddled with them. So that's something that communities there are kind of starting to take note of. And that's something that the inventory can help you with. They're in your community if you don't think they're in your community. It's just a matter of how large they are and how many they are, because the assessment and the cleanup of those can be very expensive. And that's where those funding opportunities from the EPA come in. So identifying the sites is always going to be your first step. You cannot begin the redevelopment process without knowing the inventory and knowing what you have on hand to redevelop. So that, again, is something that our office can help with through the inventory support program. We're still kind of trying to reach out to communities and get them to know, like, hey, if you need help creating an inventory of brownfields in your area, we can help with that. So that's another kind of intersection of planning and brownfields, in saying that when you guys start to make the comprehensive plans and think about redevelopment in your communities or in the areas that you work, that's somewhere where you can find that intersection and contact us if you're interested in creating an inventory and say, hey, we need some help. We're always happy to do it. And the next step you're going to want to do is to create your brownfield redevelopment team. Once you've created your inventory and once you've identified the sites that you want to redevelop, you want to think about all of the people who are going to be, or who are going to take a part in that, rather. You're going to want to think about the property owner. Do you need to take ownership of the site as a nonprofit or a municipality? Who's the current owner? How can we get ownership of the site if it needs assessment and cleanup? You're going to want to think about developers and investors, potential buyers, and at the end of the process, eventual tenants who are going to house businesses and commercial places in those redeveloped areas. You're also going to want to involve stakeholders, which are for the public, local, and regional governments, community groups, and nonprofits, as well as the EPA, the QEP, and WVU TAB, because we're always here to help you guys. And Katie emphasized the importance of touching on this slide. I've always been told, don't ever skip this slide. Whatever you do, do not purchase a property without first conducting your all-appropriate inquiry or your phase 1 environmental assessment, because you do not want to become the owner of that property and end up becoming the liable owner that is responsible for the contaminants on the site. If you purchase it before you do that, it's a big, or sorry, if you do that before you have ownership of the site, or I'm sorry, I am so tongue-tied here. Oops. Katie, I ruined it.
No, you didn't.
Whatever you do not purchase the property without first conducting your all-appropriate inquiry or phase 1 environmental site assessment. You don't want to be liable. That's the end of the story. Next.
You did a great job. Our boss is so serious that we conveyed the message that she actually made t-shirts for us. It says, "Have you had a phase 1?" Because it's that important. If you believe your site may require EPA cleanup assessment, EPA. Now I'm tongue-tied. EPA cleanup funding, because you are not eligible if you take on a site and you did not go through your phase 1 or all appropriate inquiry. And truly, it is not a complicated process. It is what you can take on. It is a process to go through that provides you with some with liability protection. And if money is a problem, there's a very, very good chance that you really should not have to pay for that. We can help put you in touch with someone who can probably pay for that under an assessment grant. So if you have, I know in Pennsylvania, there are a few entities that have an assessment grant, and they do this for a variety of sites. Again, someone can help put you in touch with that, and that is, that sets you off on the proper footing. So yeah, it is that important. Again, hey, if you've got deep pockets and you don't need a cleanup grant, then that's okay. But if you think that there's a chance that you need cleanup funding, please, please do that before you take ownership. And taking ownership means, even if it was $1 purchase, in your negotiations, it doesn't matter how much you paid for it. Again, even if you say, well, it's just $1 or they gave it to us, that's not okay to take ownership without that. Hopefully we made that clear.
Long story short, what I was trying to say is that if you take ownership before the phase 1 environmental site assessment is conducted, you can be considered liable for all of the contaminants that are on that property. And that's the last thing you want, because that's what we've really emphasized throughout, is that cleanup process can be expensive depending on what contaminants are on the site. And you don't ever want to take ownership without doing that, because federal funding is available to help you.
Well said, Seth. Thank you. To help paint the picture of where could you go with your brownfield site and help you think of the big picture and plan ahead, this gives you an idea of, if you want to start to pursue an EPA brownfield grant, what may be your general timeline. The general timeline is not when the EPA announces that the application period has been open. So it is not September when they've been announced and when the deadline is. It's not the time. We're happy to help you do this at any point along the way. But a suggested timeline would be in January or February. You could identify the sites that you may want to go after. Again, is that for a multi-purpose assessment or a cleanup grant? What are you talking about? Which type of a grant? Maybe in February or March, make sure you've created or updated your SAM.gov and grants.gov accounts. It is unfortunate, but that is a required process to actually apply for and keep your grant. And we've had to help some communities go through the process, and it can be it shouldn't be, but sometimes those sites can be cumbersome to work through. So we always encourage you to do that. And the reason we put it out early here is just, if there's not much else going on, just log in and make sure that one, you've got it set up, and two, it's active, because you do need to make sure you renew it each year. If anyone within your organization has applied for some federal funding before, there would be an account, but you may need to figure out, who's that person? Do we need to transfer it and update it? Has that person who was originally listed moved on from this position? So it's not something that we want you to forget at the last minute, because unfortunately, it gets to a point where unfortunately we just cannot help with that, and you would be at that mercy. So I don't mean to belabor that. Ownership transfer. So again, if you are looking for an assessment, or I'm sorry, multi-purpose or cleanup grant where you need to own one of the sites, at least one of the sites, start to lay out the timeline process for that. Because when you apply for, or when you receive a phase one, the majority of it is good for 180 days. Now you can update some of the elements of it. But again, you need to make sure that the timing of when you have that phase one conducted and when you look to actually submit an application for the EPA Brownfield grant in the fall, that falls under 6 months or less. So it needs to be that current. So that's why you would want to start to think about that there, late spring, probably early summer. So again, is this a property where we need to look to transfer it? Okay, then what should the timing be, and what needs to happen in order to make this ownership transfer happen? Because private individuals are not eligible for the EPA grants. So that is why you need to have local government, state, or tribal authorities, and some nonprofit entities. We can always tell you more about that. Then in the early fall, that's when you see that the grant guidelines are released. Late fall is when the application is due. And then in the spring of the year, generally around May, is when they announce those who were successful and received the funding. I do want to say, if anyone attending here applied for a grant this round on, by November 13th, if you would happen to find out that you were not successful in receiving a grant, we always want to encourage you to go through the debrief process with your EPA project officer. It doesn't cost anything, and it's a good opportunity to learn where you fell short so that you can help be prepared and successful for the next round. As I talked about earlier, talking about the intersection of planning and brownfields. When you apply for funding, so if you decide that you want to apply for an EPA Brownfield grant, the story that you tell is very important. So you'll have reviewers from the EPA from regions that are not in your own, and they are not familiar with your site. So I'm not even familiar with all the sites in West Virginia or Pennsylvania, but it would be important if you were trying to tell me information about your site, it's important for you to make sure that information is clear to us so that we can understand it and understand the history, the magnitude, and why you want to move forward. So we stress this because I believe as planners, you can understand that, not that anyone else couldn't, that was a poor word choice, but I believe you understand the importance of that. So you want to, again, tell the story of the Brownfield site. What is the cultural and historical significance of this Brownfield site or sites or the area? So you want to tell that backstory. What are the health impacts on the current population? What has happened that took it from a successful, thriving, contributing entity and site within the community to the brownfield site that it is, which means that it's vacant. So what took it from that? You want to be clear on that story. Also, you want to make sure you talk about other local and regional plans that have been adopted and that support this redevelopment vision. So if your community has recently adopted a comprehensive plan, small area plan, a redevelopment plan that talks about supporting this brownfield site or these sites and how you can how you can move forward with the redevelopment, this is where you want to talk about that in the narrative part of your EPA grant application. So it's important to show, by showing those other plans, it can be your community, can be regionally, but showing that shows the support behind the efforts that you are writing about in your application. And you want to talk about why you need that funding in order to move forward. So you want to make that clear. And then restoring the community vision. You want the brownfield to connect the past to the future. Seth helped with the wording of that. I really like it. It makes a lot of sense. So again, tell us how you're taking, again, that site that it, again, was a very much a contributing part of the area. In some situations, it's, we obviously are from Coalfield area, Seth is, but that's a big part of West Virginia. And that's what you think about when you think about the southern part of West Virginia. But how can you take that and move to the future? So it's really important that to be thinking about the story. And also, when we talk about now's the time to start working on the application, or sooner rather than later, you can always pick up last year's application, start to look through that, because generally most of the things don't change. So you could start to flesh out your story for the narrative in your application at any time when you have downtime, right? That's easy to come by. At this time, we're just going to highlight some brownfield redevelopment projects in Pennsylvania. I have welcomed Laura to jump in if there's anything she wants to add. There's Hazelwood Green. I had the opportunity to take a tour of this the October before last, and that is, it's a very cool site. So of course this previous picture, the one on the top, is from there as well. But I think it's over 170 acres, and it's got the proximity to Frick Park, but believe both of these were just touching on Hazelwood Green and the waterfront, both, I believe, were TIF districts. Laura, if you find anything you want to jump in and talk about. So when you talk about how to take a brownfield site and redevelop it, you have to not only think about how am I going to pay for assessment and cleanup, but how am I going to find the resources to help leverage and actually bring this project to fruition. And so in this situation, this was it was a TIF district, I think, right, Laura? I know the waterfront was. But I think this one received over $14 million worth of grant funding. And so it had public and private investment. And I know that it's still an ongoing process to try to, to see this project through to fruition. But, just the opportunity to be able to take it from where it was and to where it is. And also, when you talk about connecting the past to the future, the building that is actually there at Mill 19 is a pretty impressive structure. I personally have never seen anything like that, with the steel frame on the outside and the building on the interior. So that's a pretty unique way to honor the legacy of the past there. And the waterfront, man, I started going here before I even really understood what brownfields were all about. I always thought the smokestacks there incorporated into that development was a pretty cool feature. So again, that is a TIF district that that I know that is a thriving area. Also, we just want to point out that both of these are brownfield sites. They're not typical. Many times a brownfield site can just be a very small half acre, 1 acre site. It can be a building. It can be a series of buildings on a site. Sometimes you're able to work with the buildings that are on the site. Sometimes they're beyond repair and you have to demolish them. But these are great examples of being able to, again, make the river access continue to be thriving parts of the Pittsburgh community. Laura, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Not really. I mean, I'm not sure if Hazelwood Green was a TIF or not. The waterfront definitely was. Maybe it was. I don't know. But I do know that, you were talking a little bit about the story and how, like, the story of a property and kind of linking it. And I think these are two really prime examples of just, both of these properties have a very storied, like, history and past, and I think are pretty, like, iconic in a way and well known, and that link to planning, really, particularly for Hazelwood Green, I think I mean, I want to say there was like a 3-year planning effort, to create the plan that is like, probably that one schematic picture that you showed of what the eventual full scale redevelopment will look like one day, and really what that vision, right, was for that property. So I think that's just important to add to, and really does circle back to kind of, showing and illustrating and presenting that story, and how it's going to link to the future as well, and the ties to planning too with it. So
Thanks, Laura. I don't think the Hazelwood Green was a TIF district, but according to the notes that they had given me from, again, this was over a year ago, they did say over $14 million in grant funding, a total investment of $51 million in public and private loans. But again, it's a 178 acre piece of, a project. So, this is, it is a beast, but, it's turned out to be good. Like you said, it's a good site to highlight. There's still a long way to go, and they're still trying to adjust and figure out what is still the best path forward for it. All right. At this time, we're going to see if anyone has any questions. We have a little bit extra information coming up. Happy to take any questions. If you have them now, you could ask them in person. You could type them into the chat. You can always reach out to us after the webinar as well. And Becca has a poll question to ask.
Yes. So again, feel free to type any questions in the chat. But while you're pondering all of these wonderful things that you have learned today, I'm going to launch a Zoom poll. And basically, we are just trying to measure your learning from this webinar, because we are grant funded. And so we need to report back on how much learning has happened. So if you could please answer this question, that would be super helpful. And then again, if you do have questions, feel free to pop those into the chat. But seeing none so far, I think it's Seth's turn, but we will still have an opportunity for questions if you think of anything. So I'm gonna end this poll now. Oop. Okay, over to you, Seth.
Okay, I'm going to take it back over and try not to get tongue-tied this time, but it happens to the best of us, so bear with me. So for some wrap-up information, WVU TAB, we're the technical assistance to Brownfield provider for all of EPA Region 3. That includes Pennsylvania, it includes West Virginia, DC, Delaware, and Maryland. The key resources that we offer include Brownfield education, including today's webinar. We also do trainings and events in person. We also help with resource identification, so we can offer help with grant writing assistance, with grant review, and with creating resource roadmaps, which is something that we kind of want to get more involved with in the upcoming months. We can also help with local Brownfield program support. That includes Brownfield inventory development, any questions that you might have on sites, and technical support related to those sites. And we can also help with project development and design assistance. We get site-specific design assistance and design support from the TAB team, as well as the Design College at WVU. So for some upcoming webinars and some opportunities to learn more, on January 17th, we are having a webinar on how to navigate ACRES with ease. ACRES is the reporting program that the EPA uses for its grants. So it can seem a little overwhelming when you first get on it. So that's kind of just a run through on that, how to navigate it. The registered link will be on there when you guys receive a copy of the slide after the presentation. And we will also be having an EPA Region 3 Brownfields Town Hall on project financing. That's January 23rd. Again, the link to register will be included in the slides there. You should be able to click it. If you run into any trouble with any of the links after we send the slides out, just let us know and we'll be happy to fix them.
And Seth, just a quick, we had a couple of questions pop up, so I'm going to just cut into your spiel a bit. And first off, this question might be for Katie. Can you tell us about any current projects that TAB is working on or assisting clients with in the region?
Let's see. I feel like there's such variety, and we talk about this often, how sometimes when we have folks reach out to us, and people can find out about us in a variety of ways. Maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's a referral. Sometimes we may only speak with someone once or twice. We were just able to meet with them, provide them with a handoff of information, or put them in touch with someone, and that's okay. You know, hopefully they walk away a little bit with a little more clarity than they came to us with. So sometimes that's all we work with. I'm trying to think. We had a conversation just last week about someone, and he may be considering a job training grant. Carrie here is more of our resident, our director is more of our resident advisor on job training grants. So we're trying to see where that goes. We're having a couple of conversations about possibly doing, getting ready for an inventory process where we can start to meet virtually. Once the community starts to have the discussion about who is their team, and the thought would be that we meet with them virtually, explain the process, and then explain to them how we can go to the community and help them go through that inventory process. And that inventory process is you kind of assemble your team. Of course, it's all volunteer based. And it's really not that big of a time commitment, but it's really who are some of your the project champions within your community. And it's a windshield survey. So depending on the size of your community, if it's small, you may be, familiar with it enough to do a quick drive through. If it's a bigger community, you may need to break it up in what seems like achievable chunks for you. And so once you do that, we have some tools we can put you in touch with, and that's what we've been explaining to them. So we have a tool called Regrid, which we can share, that allows the folks to enter the information in real time about the sites. And you go through a series of questions so that you've populated that for the site. And then in the end, you'll have a map that shows where that area is. And so, or we can also work to map those things internally. So that's actually a conversation that we had yesterday. So we're working through that process. And what we also explained to them is, because when we work through the inventory process and explain that, if it would be beneficial to go to the community and kind of do a Brownfield basic session for their planning commission, and team up with, maybe the county commission. I know in Pennsylvania it's different. You have boroughs, and so I'm not trying to disregard that, but for example, at the municipality level or the county level, we explained to them that we could do that too. So we could kind of do a little bit of a double duty almost, explain, kind of a 2-hour crash course of what are brownfields, and then relay that into going through the inventory process. I feel like I really belabored this, but I hope that was somewhat helpful. We did help do some grant reviews this past fall. So we don't write grants, but we are happy to be that extra set of eyes. Sometimes we have a lot of comments, and sometimes, the comments are minor, but we do give a thorough review to them. Seth, can you think of something else we have going on, especially in Pennsylvania? Becca?
We've got a bunch more questions, so if you don't mind, if we could hop on to the next question, and then if you think of any more, maybe drop those in the chat, Seth. I know you were about to say something, but what is the average grant amount you see in the TAs and other opportunities versus what are some of the larger amounts? So if you could just give like a ballpark number.
Honestly, I'm not real sure. I would say it probably can go between $30,000 and $50,000, but it can absolutely go higher, as we touched on. That depends on the level of service that's required.
Okay. Awesome.
Again, the contact person, if you have some assistance with that, I'd be happy to put you in touch with. They're very kind and helpful.
Perfect. Okay. How about for a cleanup? What are some of the highest costs involved in cleanup of contaminants?
I feel like I'm still learning that myself.
Katie,
I'm sorry.
Just touch on this real quick. From what I've learned so far, only being on the team for 5 months, it appears that the most expensive part is that once you've identified the contaminant, is actually removing the contaminant. So that's either putting a cap over the soil and seeing, having to submit to those biannual inspections to see if the contaminant is seeping up through that cement cap that they'll put down, or sometimes it involves actually digging up the topsoil, taking it, disposing of it properly, having all of the appropriate hazmat gear while you're dealing with it, and then bringing in new topsoil to put it down on the site. Those are really probably the most expensive areas, is the actual cleanup of the contaminant, because a lot of them are really nasty and really harmful things. It's not always lead and asbestos. Sometimes it's heavy metals like mercury and nickel and tin. And sometimes with the glass factory, I think they brought up cobalt was one of the things that they use in colored glass a lot that comes up on those sites. So in addition to the lead and asbestos that's coming up, you've also got all of those really harmful heavy metals on former industrial sites that were used in production processes.
Great job, Seth. Great job. Phase 2 assessment, part of what would come out of that would be some cost estimates for that. And so you would know if you do nothing, kind of a middle of the road, and generally what would be the most expensive. So you would know that that's preparing what's called a draft ABCA before you apply for a cleanup grant, so that you have an idea. And it's very important that you pick someone, that you choose someone that you think would do a very good job of going through that effort with you, because one thing that can definitely harm you is, and in any situation, sometimes it's not avoidable, is being unprepared. So just having someone go through that process, your environmental consultant who's helped you prepare for that, so that you hopefully they've overestimated and to give you the information that Seth just discussed. Good job, Seth.
We also have a question about if maybe we have a link that we could drop in the chat that would be a good overview of phase 1 and 2 ESAs and what to look for.
Absolutely.
So maybe if that could be dropped in the chat for Mike Fox.
Sure thing.
So while you're looking for that, I'll also read the next question. So this is a hypothetical one. If someone was professional / concerned citizen, say a future project champion, that was living in a Brownfields denial community, what is TAB's approach to pushing local governments to perform a brownfield inventory?
Oh, boy, do we know a thing or two about that. Words matter, I think, is my biggest consideration. We talk about this a lot with climate change. We work with a lot of communities and folks who don't believe in climate change. That's not the wording to go in and speak to them about. So instead, we talk about things that they do relate to, which is flooding. We don't have the wildfires here, thankfully, but trying to understand what's the best way to reach into that and make it relatable to that. And that's why we try to figure out who the project champion is within that community and try to establish a relationship with them, because we don't want to be seen as coming in from the outside and trying to strong arm ourselves, but really just trying to build that relationship and understand what may be a good route. So again, we're here learning all the time, and I hope that is somewhat helpful.
I'll also add that a big thing that we really emphasize is building that relationship and connecting with the project champion in order to learn more of the story and the history of the site and why redevelopment might be needed in that area. Because in West Virginia, it's easy for us, because we kind of have an understanding of that culture and that history, to kind of interact with locals and say, well, we understand and we sympathize with you because we've dealt with it and we grew up in these areas as well. But going into areas outside of our state that we're not too familiar with, we don't really want to ever have the appearance of coming in and having this kind of arrogant attitude of, oh, here's all this jargon, we have the expertise on it, this is what you should do, but kind of leveling with the community, leveling with the local government, and kind of weighing on the benefits that it would have and how it could kind of spur economic development and regrowth and benefit the populations that live there.
Yeah, I will say too that we are happy to come into any community and to meet with any group, even if it's not like a group that ultimately puts in a a grant, we're still happy to come in and do any kind of education and answer questions. It looks like we did have a question about if gas stations were considered brownfields. So former gas stations, yes, those are considered brownfields. I can answer that one. And then Katie put a link in the chat for the phase 1 and 2 overviews. So Mike, who asked for some more information on that. I think we're all caught up on the questions.
And the CM number is provided here on your screen. So thanks for asking. Laura gave that to us.
Perfect. Were there any other questions? These are great. What is your favorite or most interesting brownfield project?
Good question, Mike. Mike, I personally was exposed to brownfields in my very first job, and everything was green and new, and it was actually redevelopment of sites. I saw Sean on here. It was actually in Charlestown, West Virginia, that academic building that I showed. It was just really neat to go through the project from a former industrial site. And it was actually a link that required cooperation between the city of Charlestown and its adjacent city, Ranson. And again, it was just a learning process for me to learn. I had the opportunity to watch some great experts in the field. Again, Sean, I don't know if you're still here. I saw you. Great one to learn from, but great environmental folks and leadership, and just showing how important it was for adjacent cities to work with one another, because in that situation, those brownfields straddled both sides. Again, it straddled the property line, extended into both cities, but the community doesn't know or care. So how can you find a way to work through that? So many different things to consider there. And again, just partnerships in a variety of ways. So that's my answer.
Lovely. What is the longest duration spent on a brownfields project? Correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, but that landfill to library project, didn't that take about a decade?
Yes, don't lose hope. Yes, sometimes they can take some time. Yeah, it's patience. It requires a lot of patience. And that's the story of brownfield work. And if you ever feel frustrated, feel free to talk to us. We're happy to bounce that out. And that the Hazelwood Green site, they actually, I think, purchased that in 2002, and here we are in 2023, almost 24, and it still has a long way to go, but at least it's cleaned up. The site's looking good, and there's still a lot of interest and more action to come there on that site. So,
Great.
and it depends.
Okay, we have another question. Do you have examples of multi-municipal partnerships?
Well, there is something called, if someone wants to, I don't know if I have a great example, but one of the assessment grants that you can apply for through the EPA is actually, a coalition grant. And that would require a strong lead. And then you could have one or two, maybe three other co-leads, but you need to have someone who's had that experience and has the stronger capacity. And I know I can't think of something right off the bat, but I know we could find one with you to show how to work together, and you kind of let those who are new to it learn from those who have some more experience. But we actually like to reach out to, in our situation here in West Virginia, it's the regional planning districts, and I know you have them as well in Pennsylvania. Those are great. Some areas have it down a little bit better than others, but being able to bring everyone to the table, especially, again, those municipalities that don't have a lot of experience, staff level, and capacity. I was very general with that, but if that is something that you would like, reach out and we can definitely give you an example. Thanks, Anna.
Perfect. Are there any rules of thumb you might apply to a site that helps guide your decision to remove contaminants or to remediate/constrain on site?
I think it depends on somebody speak up if they have some other thoughts too, but what is the end goal? There are some really neat ways you can incorporate it into your end design, that you can keep it there on site. As Seth said, you can cap it. Sometimes I've seen them incorporated in some other actually elevating, like stacking the contaminated soil and capping it in that way, and that works with the design of the project. That's actually, there's one I'm thinking about in New Jersey, I think.
I'll also add there that there's something, if you do pursue the EPA funding, called the ABCA, which is your analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. That's where you'll kind of create 3 different options that you could pursue for the intended use of the site and which one you would think would be most cost effective. And the EPA is kind of big on the cost effectiveness of it while also keeping in mind the end use of the site. So they obviously, you know, want to kind of balance both. So if you have an intended end use for the site, the EPA wants to see in your application, how are you going to implement cost effectiveness to be able to both remediate the site, not have to worry about the contamination, while also not spending unnecessary amounts of money on the cleanup.
Great job.
Okay, another question. Are there any good private sources for grant funds for brownfields?
Foundations, that could be a source of funding. Seth, you look like you were ready to speak, and we were just talking about this some yesterday.
I was just going to say, I'm actually working on a master grant spreadsheet. A lot of them aren't related specifically to brownfields, but they will help in redevelopment projects, oftentimes not necessarily with the cleanup or the assessment that the federal grants would help with, but helping fund other soft costs and other hard costs associated with the project. So we're kind of looking at state options of funding that are available, nonprofit options of funding, as well as community foundations and things like that that could help with it as well. As well.
Great. I also put in the chat to join our newsletter because we like to include funding opportunities that different communities are eligible for as well. So that'll be clickable once I get the slides out to you all.